Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Colleagues, I rise to give my no-vote explanation to the Department of Corrections budget. In this body, we claim to value public safety. We claim to be fiscally responsible. This budget does not reflect those values. This corrections budget puts our communities at risk and plays politics with our county jails. It throws all the good work we've been doing on criminal justice reform out the window. We all know what the problem is. We know what it's going to take to reverse the current trends. We have passed bills in this body to make the long-term necessary changes, and we have spoken platitudes about criminal justice reform. But then when the department needs to implement those plans, we as a body are directing them to implement this budget, which pulls the rug out from beneath them. This budget that reduces general fund spending by $47 million, not because of what the Department of Corrections has done or failed to do or what they need, but because some legislators are willing to make permanent cuts to effective public safety programs simply so they can claim they've raised temporary road funding. Let's talk about impossible choices. For anyone who's spoken to MDOC staff, you know their top concern is the number of vacancies at facilities, which results in mandated overtime and burnout. The MDOC sought $10.5 million to address this issue in the coming fiscal year. But the conference report only provides 2/3 of that funding. And even that funding, the 2/3, is not real. Rather, they appropriate those funds. The conference report directs the department to spend funds appropriated in previous years that the department was utilizing for projects and improvements at their facilities. Imagine that choice. You can hire staff, or you can make the investments in your facilities that are needed to protect staff and the public. Who in this chamber is willing to look a corrections officer in the face and tell them what choice they would make? More safety so they have less overtime, or less safety in the actual infrastructure of their own buildings? MDOC needs to replace the GPS tethers that monitor thousands of offenders in our community. But rather than provide actual funding, the conference report again only goes as far as allowing MDOC to spend funds that were previously appropriated for other projects. Should we be asking the department and the citizens of Michigan to make this impossible choice? Would you rather have prisons that operate safely or tethers that operate at all? Because the legislature doesn't see fit to provide you with both. Many of you have visited the MDOC's operations the last few years. They have become a national leader in vocational training and employment for offenders. You've heard from employers in your district that have spoken about the value of having a correction system that prepares people for work and return on investment for the state from this approach. And yet, the budget before us seeks to damage those programs before killing them outright next year. Phony fund shifts can't hide the fact that this budget that will result in a historic cut in prisoner education, job training, and some of those effective programs for preventing future crime. Excuse me. Why are we forcing ourselves to make the choice between having effective programs that save us money versus the long-term, short-term thinking of cutting these programs, to have just a little more to put towards roads in 1 year? I'm sure we will hear that the impact of this budget is minimal, that funds are being shifted here, and that there are various accounting gimmicks. We'll have little concerns. But ask yourself this: do cuts to community corrections and other successful diversion programs sound like no cause for concern? Does a reduction in funding for substance abuse treatment in the middle of an opioid crisis make sense? Will reductions in reimbursements to local units of government be no big deal to the local law enforcement in your own counties? Does elimination of the vocational villages over the next 2 years sound like Michigan is moving forward or backwards? And finally, should we be willing to settle for anything other than a real solution to the need for adequate staffing in our correctional facilities? We find ourselves having to answer these questions about this budget for no reason beyond the inability of some to propose a real long-term solution to Michigan's infrastructure needs. As work continues on this issue, join me in defeating this budget, which places impossible choices in front of the citizens of Michigan that they should not have to make. Our citizens deserve a correction system that keeps us safe, actively works towards rehabilitation, and is focused on saving taxpayers money through the long-term success of the department. This budget fails to accomplish any of those important goals, and I ask my colleagues to vote no.